Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. I'm Ruth Shelley, President of the Rotary Club of Portland. Welcome to our live weekly membership meeting. Every meeting I've opened with this year's theme, Rotary Opens Opportunities. Yes, Rotary opens opportunities to find solutions for today's challenges, healing from the pandemic, recovery from the economic downturn, and peace building as we seek racial justice. This week, we focus on door number 2, the economy, as our speaker, Brady Swenson, explores the revolutionary new monetary technology of Bitcoin. But first, let's welcome Rotarian David Noel for our reflection. David?
Yes, good morning. Do you read the acknowledgement section of the books you read? I always do. And I'm always struck by the praise they heap on their editors who make them write, rewrite, revise, rewrite again and again. Most often, they also thank a couple of their close friends to whom they've also given the manuscript and asked for critical comments. Now, these are professional authors. They know what they're doing, yet they welcome criticism. I believe this is a trait of all great authors, and it should be a trait of all of us as Rotarians. I would like to close with 2 quotes. The first from John Wooden. A coach is someone who can give correction without causing resentment. And the second, an acquaintance merely enjoys your company. A fair weather companion flatters when all is well. A true friend has your best interests at heart and the pluck to tell you what you need to hear. Thank you.
What wonderful quotes. Thank you, David. And if you'd like to volunteer to give the reflection, it's easy. Siobhan has put the link in the chat, or you can email her directly. Thank you for thinking about it. Now I'd ask that Rotarians who have invited a guest to raise their real or virtual hand, and Mike will call on you to unmute and introduce them. Or if you're a visiting Rotarian who came on your own, please raise your hand and introduce yourself, or let us know of your presence via the chat box. Mike, do you see that we have any guests today?
I see that Reed has his hand up to introduce one.
Please.
Yeah, it looks like a few of my friends from high school back in the day have joined us for our program today. We have Andrew Toner, Associate Director, Enterprise Sales at Icertis, Blake Meisner, Program Manager at Amazon, and Tyson Heffley, a Project Manager at IDM. And I'm hoping we have a couple others that are trailing in here shortly.
Wonderful. Andrew, Blake, Tyson, welcome. And thank you all for attending our meeting.
I also see that we have Charlotte. Charlotte, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I sometimes come to your Portland Rotary. My family lives in Portland, Southeast. And I'm from the Englewood, New Jersey Rotary, where in the last 3 months, we've had 2 Portland speakers, Angel and the guy from the TED Talk.
Wonderful. Thank you. Glad you're here with us, Charlotte. Any
So
others?
Yeah.
I don't see any more.
Well, welcome to you all, and thank you again. Now I'd like to extend a happy anniversary to everyone who joined Rotary Club of Portland in January. As you know, we alternate each week honoring birthdays and Rotary anniversaries for the month. Please note the names of these anniversary people and reach out to one of them with a call or an email, since keeping up our memberships during this time is more important than ever. Look at that, 40 plus years for Bob Elfers and George Carl George, sorry, the curse of having 2 first names like I do. We congratulate you all. And now moving on, let's welcome Rotarian Mike Rosenberg to call for club board member nominations. Mike?
Thank you, Ruth. So as you may have seen in announcements in the email and whatnot, it is now time for Rotary Board of Directors nominations. So I'll give you a quick little overview, if you don't already know, of what the term is 2 years. It'll start in July, so July 1st. To be eligible, to be nominated to the board, you must be a member in good standing for at least the last 2 years on that date. So basically, if you joined earlier than July of 2019, you are eligible. And also noting that if you're interested in becoming an officer eventually in the club, so that you can be on leadership, etc., this is the first step in that, is joining the club's board. You can nominate yourself. You can nominate other Rotarians. To do that nomination, you're going to have a moment here in a second to do it right now. You can also email the office. You can email me, and I'll put my email in the chat of someone you'd like to nominate. And then, of course, if you have any questions about what it entails to be a board member, please reach out to any of the current or former board. I'm sure would be happy to answer any questions about time commitment, responsibilities, all of those sort of things. But this is a big part of our club. So you can nominate today. And then next week's meeting, we will also have a chance to do that. And I think we have the goal of holding those elections the week after that on the 9th. So really start thinking about this or doing nominations. So now I will open it up to see if we have any nominations now. You can raise a hand or use your virtual hand. But again, we request that if you are going to nominate somebody, make sure that they know that you're nominating them and are there to open to accepting the nomination. That's how we tend to do it. All right, so it looks like maybe I don't see any hands, although my thing disappeared. There we go. Hopefully we'll have some folks who are coming next week prepared to do it. Like I said, you can send those nominations to me via email, and I'll put that in the chat now.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for leading this process. Club leadership is so important, and we really ask you to thoughtfully consider it. And now, please welcome President-elect Reed Miller for an update on our trust drive. Reed?
Thank you, President Ruth. Okay, as you all know, we have our annual trust drive going right now. This is the one time of the year that we raise money for our club, all of our different great programs that we have out in the community. All of the money that we raise throughout the year is during this trust drive. We've been going for 2 months now. We are in the final week of our trust drive. Sunday will be the end of our trust drive. And so far we have raised $125,000. We have a goal of $180,000. So we've got a long ways to go. I want to encourage you all to get that pledge in while you still can before the trust drive is over. I thank you all very much for your contributions. And if you haven't made that donation, please be sure to do so. And as this is our last little push here, we've been a little bit hush-hush on it, try not to push too hard this year, as we know it's been a difficult year on many of us. And we are going to make the last push here and start making phone calls. So if anybody's interested in participating in helping out, making some phone calls to help raise those funds for all of our different activities that we do in the community, please feel free to reach to me directly. And if you haven't made that donation yet, be expecting a call from me. Thank you very much, Ruth.
All right, thank you, Reed. Please do carefully consider a donation. We only have 5.5 days to go. And now please welcome Rotarian Jim Dotson to tell you about our Committee of the Month, Wheels of Power. Jim?
Thank you, Ruth. Good afternoon, Rotarians. Well, again, yes, I'm here to tell you about Wheels of Power. I know Jim Flood last week told you about, we've been in existence 40 plus years. We've had 1,000 devices given out to needy people. But I thought I'd go a little more into the history and where we really all came from. What was the baseline of getting this going? Scott Lofton provided me with an article from our 75th anniversary booklet. I suggest any Rotarian, if you haven't read it yet, to do so. There's an amazing amount of information of where we came from, and you can kind of compare it to where we are today. And really the article in there concerning Wheels of Power, I really quickly learned on how Rotary today can easily transform and move forward with an idea and put things together and really focus on it. Back in the early 70s, it wasn't quite that way. We were still in a learning phase. We were in a phase where we're trying to figure out who we were within the community itself. And so in 1970, the president sent out a survey really to find out the ideas and the beliefs of where we stand in the community itself, trying to build projects and programs at that time. Amazingly, it took another 6 years before another survey went out that really focused on our fundraising for our foundation to support our programs itself, and really more how to personalize it and how it would not only benefit the community, but how it would benefit Rotary itself. And upon that, it took another 2 years for the current project committee that was in place to 1978 to really get the form or the business plan formed itself, and for us to deliver our first wheelchair to someone in need in August of that year. And that was really the start. So it was a very methodical thing that took 8 years to really get the baseline for what we have today. And so with that being said, you really look at what the Wheels of Power means to our club and our community, not only back then, but today. To me, it's a way that we change families' lives. They're affected in different ways, new visions, new realizations. It really presents service above self. And also we talk about these as devices, scooters, wheelchairs, and that thing. They're really not just that. They're different makers in people's lives. It's a way to get back to at least of a piece of who you were in a lot of cases. I remember, I think it was two of my first visits out in the community to individuals on this. One was a woman about 65 years old, and she needed a scooter, not only for everyday things, but what she presented to us is she used to play music and sing, and she wanted to get back to doing that. She used to do a lot of it earlier for a lot of adult living facilities and other type of organizations, but because of her illness and where she was at the point in her life, there was no way she could get to these places. But really, our scooter provided her the means to do something passionate that not only helped her, but also helped others. There was another gentleman that worked 30 plus years in a government institution, cooking and serving individuals. He also lived in downtown Portland. And to him, this provided him a way to get back to his passion, to reach out to people. He wanted to take our scooter so he could get to a couple different homeless shelters around town to where he could cook again, serve others, and just have that interaction that was really important to him. So to me, I really enjoy learning about these individuals, and it is a real personal experience that I really suggest to others who are on the call today to really check out Wheels of Power. I think you'd enjoy it. I think you'd see how it affects our community in a great way in a lot of ways. If you have or don't know how to join the committee, please reach out to Saban herself, email her, look on the website, reach out to our chairperson, Scott Lofton. If you have individuals or organizations that might need the support of this committee, please do that. We have cards, we have brochures. We're willing to go out and talk to them directly and explain things. But if you're looking for something different, because I've been on numerous different committees, that one that I feel, along with others we have, but really touches people on an individual basis, and you really see, what it does or could change in the community. I'd suggest that you check out our Wheels of Power monthly meeting itself. So really, that's all I have, Ruth, at this time. Thank you for the few minutes I've been given to talk about this great program that's been developed since the 1970s. So I'd like to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate that history, and I think it shows that the thoughtful origin of a committee speaks to its sustainability. What compelling stories from the recipients as well. We appreciate it. And now we're going to disappear and enter a virtual table talk. Please introduce yourselves to the others in your group. A minute or so before you come back to this main meeting, you'll get a visual heads up. Now, my email was burning up today with talks of blizzards and a snow day in my old home of Madison, Wisconsin. So may I suggest a topic for your discussion? When people don't know what to say, you can always ask, how's the weather? But in this unusual year, how's the weather compared to past Januaries for you? And have you personally felt the impact of climate change? Here we go. Now back to our program. After our speaker today is finished, if you'd like to ask Brady a question, Maria will moderate the Q&A through the chat box. And now please welcome President-elect Rotarian Reed Miller as today's chair of the day. Reed?
Thank you, President Ruth. So what is Bitcoin? Some extremely volatile fake internet money with no value. Few people got rich, many others lost all their money. Well, maybe, maybe not. Did you know that Harvard, Yale, Brown, and the University of Michigan endowments have all been investing in Bitcoin? MassMutual Life Insurance, BlackRock, Skybridge, Fidelity, and many others have all started to dabble in Bitcoin. Do these institutions know something that we're missing? Maybe, maybe not. I'm no expert on the matter, but lucky for us, we have the perfect person with us today to explain what Bitcoin is, the history, the risks, and why it might be important for us to understand. Brady Swenson is the head of education at Swan Bitcoin. He hosts two very successful weekly podcasts, Citizen Bitcoin and Swan Signal Live. We are truly privileged to have Brady with us today to educate us on the new, well, 12-year-old cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. Brady, let it rip.
Thank you so much, Reed. I really appreciate the kind introduction. Hello, Rotary Club of Portland. Thank you to President Ruth for having me on and hosting today's session. Thank you again to Reed and everyone here for being here and for your time. I'm really excited to talk to you about Bitcoin. It's obviously something I'm very passionate about. I have been researching and studying and trying to understand what Bitcoin is for about 4 years now. And it has increasingly consumed my time, my brain cycles, and now I work full time in the space, working to educate people about what's going on here. So to start learning about Bitcoin, I think you need to ask the question, what is money? Really start at the first principles. And what's interesting is we have been living with a US dollar for the past 50 years that is really an aberration of history in terms of money. And I'll get to that in just a little bit. But money is a foundational technology of human civilization. It's been around for a very long time. We invented it to solve the problems of barter. You would have to, want something that I had, and I would have to want something that you had at the same time. Economists call this the coincidence of wants problem. And money was invented to solve that problem. So over time and through history, various markets and economies and countries would converge on a money that worked best for them. Far back, we've seen shells used as money, special stones. We've seen beads, glass beads, for instance, used as money. Lots of different things have been used as money. But we eventually started to converge on precious metals for several reasons, silver and gold in particular. And the main reasons are because it is scarce. It has a particular naturally enforced scarcity because only so much of it exists in the planet, and it's costly or takes work to extract from the earth. So that's important to remember, and I'll bring that back up again later as well. And it was divisible. It was durable. We can make coins out of it. It doesn't tarnish at all. It's fungible, meaning that one gold coin is equally as valuable as another gold coin of the same weight. So it can be passed around, and it's not a particular coin is not more valuable than another coin if of course they're the same weight. It's verifiable. There are ways to, people would buy it on gold coins, for instance, or look inside and see if they were pure or not, or even melt them down, melt gold down to create new coins, just to verify that it is actually gold. Um, and it is divisible. It can be made into coins, and it has an established history, so people trust it over time. So we really did converge on gold as our main money throughout history, and especially in recent history. It has a long established basically trust, like I mentioned, through since about the 1400s or 1500s, when the florin became the standard for the European economy. And even more broadly than that, it spread quite far from its sort of central creation point in Florence, Italy. And it basically created the foundation for the Renaissance in terms of a monetary foundation. The banks that created or minted these coins in Italy would create them and maintain their value. Basically, they didn't inflate the supply by issuing a paper version of it, and therefore able to sort of increase the supply of the gold behind the scenes, so to speak. So it was very stable for a couple hundred years, and therefore very trusted, and allowed for a flourishing economy to develop. Of course, there were other reasons why the Renaissance occurred, but this is one of the kind of foundations to allow it to flourish for so long. So fast forward to the United States, when the founding fathers were debating about money, and of course, money being a very important part of society, they actually debated the idea of central banking very thoroughly. And there were several founding fathers who were on one side and several who were on the other. So we went back and forth for quite a while. But even though whenever we had a central banking system, or even a decentralized banking system, or there was no central federal bank, we operated the economy on a gold standard. That continued through the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank in 1913. The dollar was backed by gold. In 1933, the gold standard was suspended temporarily by FDR, where gold was actually confiscated from the population. And then we went back on a gold standard, and then we kind of drifted away over time as the dollar became the global reserve currency in the 1940s with the Bretton Woods Agreement. So the world decided at that point to trust the US dollar and trust the Federal Reserve Bank to maintain the value of the US dollar by maintaining the gold standard. So the importance here is that there was an external force on the inflation rate of the money. So we only pull out a certain amount of gold every year. Historically, it's been about 1.8 or 2% added to the supply of every year. In fact, what astonishes me is all of the gold in the world could fit into like 4 Olympic-sized pools, 4 or 5. So we add to that supply a little bit every year by gold mining. And that provided this external force on the inflation rate of the US dollar. Well, in 1971, we had printed some dollars, more dollars than we had gold, that were backed by gold, and we had started to sort of decrease or inflate the value of the US dollar. So in 1971, Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard, and again, it was supposed to be a temporary measure, but it ended up not being. And so for the past 50 years, we've been living with a fiat money, and fiat means by decree in Latin. And so it means in this case, money by decree of a central party. So the Federal Reserve Bank has been able to determine the money supply of the dollar for the past 50 years. And for some time, that was a relatively stable way to run the dollar. We were able to control the inflation rate through various methods of banking and monetary science, essentially. But in the end, fiat currencies throughout history, essentially controlled monies, where the money supply is controlled by a small number of people or an individual, have inflated in value to the point where they are not valuable anymore. So we have lots of examples throughout history, and even recent examples like Venezuela and Argentina. Turkey's going through a lot of inflation right now. And now in the United States, we're printing a lot more money. So we did this in 2008 as a response to the economic crisis. We printed a bunch of money, and we can argue about whether or not that was a good idea. It probably was in the short term, but it creates a moral hazard in the long term. So you have to do that again. So in response to the economic consequences of COVID, we have printed trillions of dollars. All of the dollars, US dollars that have ever existed have been printed in the past 15 years. Sorry, not all, 70% have been printed of all the US dollars in the past 15 years. So you're thinking, Brady, we're not really seeing inflation. So what is your point? The CPI indicator, the Consumer Price Index, which the Federal Reserve Bank targets at about a 2% inflation rate, is a gamed metric, just to put it very bluntly. It's changed, all the time, many times throughout the past 50 years to make it basically look like there's no inflation in terms of the average consumer. However, we're seeing a lot of inflation in scarce goods and equities, for instance, or real estate, or higher education, or healthcare. These are services and goods that require a lot of human labor, are desired by a lot of people, and are scarce. There's a limited amount of healthcare services available, of higher education available, of real estate, obviously, and of equities on the stock market, for instance. So we're actually seeing about 15 to 20% inflation among these assets. So where does that come from? Well, people who are getting this money from this money that's being printed, which is largely given to corporations and banks, and now it's, some of it is being handed out directly to citizens, but the vast majority goes to large corporations and banks who get access to it first, and then they can, pass it down at higher interest rates that they're going to collect on that money down the tier to the average citizen. So these people who have access to this money early, and because they have generated wealth, they continue to generate wealth by buying these assets. So they have access to these wealth generating assets, and the average citizen does not. In 1971, you could see a very clear graph. Productivity has been rising with wages and average compensation for 100 years. And then at 1971, wages flatline, real wages flatline, productivity continues to go up. So we are literally, not being compensated for our increased productivity, our ingenuity, the inventions that we have been making as average citizens, as average wage earners. Okay, so this is a result of inflation, and Bitcoin is the opposite of the dollar in this sense. It is a decentralized money that cannot be inflated. No more Bitcoin can be created. We arrive at that by consensus of the network. There are nodes that I run one, for instance, that enforce the rules. There's a copy of a ledger distributed amongst all these nodes, and there's over 100,000 of them around the world. And every 10 minutes, all of these nodes independently verify the ledger. And one of the things they verify is that there are only a certain amount of coins in existence. So this is an alternative to fiat money that historically has ended in inflation. And I don't think the dollar is an exception to this. Fiat global reserve currencies have typically lasted about 200 years, maybe 250 years. So I don't think the dollar will be any different than historical fiat currencies. So in this case, and like Reed said, there are large companies, corporations, universities, very conservative insurance companies like Mass Mutual, who are investing in Bitcoin. And you have to ask yourself why they're doing that. Well, it's a hedge against the possibility that the value of their money is going to be inflated away. So there's a man named Michael Saylor who runs a company called MicroStrategy. It's a publicly traded company. It's been around for quite some time. He's been president of it for 30 years. It's a kind of an exceptional case in that it's a public company that's been run by a president for so long, and he has, I think, majority control of the company. So he was able to move pretty quickly, but he does have fiduciary responsibility. He does have responsibility to his C-suite and other people to convince, to bring them on board about investing their entire corporate treasury, which is about $500 million, into Bitcoin. And he did that research. And after a few months, he went through the due diligence with his staff, with several other large companies who serve in the Bitcoin industry, accountants, lawyers, etc., and eventually came out on the other side, deciding to put their entire corporate treasury into Bitcoin. And he cites the reason that the value of his cash is decreasing at 10 to 15% per year. It's like a melting ice cube. And so there's kind of this urgency now for this alternative store of value. And that's what Bitcoin provides. So I just wanted to go through with the last few minutes here before I would, take some questions from you. Common misconceptions about Bitcoin. And these are things that you will hear in the mainstream media. You may have heard about Bitcoin that I think aren't true, and I'll try to explain why. One is that Bitcoin is a bubble, or that it's too volatile. Well, Bitcoin is a new money. It's going through what we call a monetization process. Economists call a monetization process. And it follows a very clear pattern. It starts out as this kind of curious collectible among a small number of people, this kind of curiosity, and then develops into a wider used medium or a wider used store of value as it becomes trusted. And then it develops into a medium of exchange for goods as it starts to become less volatile, and then into finally a unit of account. So we actually measure our wealth in this money. And that's when it's finally extremely stable. And so, yes, Bitcoin is going through this process, and it's a volatile situation. Bitcoin has been through several of these cycles, and it has always come back after a large volatile drop, and then with a large volatile run. But it is very clearly following a path of growth, like any internet technology would. So I don't think it's a bubble. I think it's a new technology that's being adopted, like the phone or the internet itself. And they all show this sort of adoption curve. It's just a money that's being adopted, a monetary technology that's being adopted. Bitcoin wastes energy. All right. Bitcoin mining does use a lot of energy. Gold mining uses a lot of energy as well. And remember, I said I would come back to this point that gold is hard to get out of the ground. It takes energy. And so Bitcoin is similar in that sense. It takes computer energy and turns it into Bitcoin. And one aspect of a good store of value is that it takes work to create. So a fiat money, by contrast, is relatively cheap to print on paper compared to pulling gold out of the ground. And now even easier. It's really just the push of a button in a digital network. So we call that easy money, and it's therefore able to be inflated quickly over a short amount of time. But money that takes work to produce cannot. Bitcoin does use quite a bit of energy. It's about the same amount of energy that the country of Ireland uses, which sounds like a lot, but that's actually less energy than we use in Christmas lights in the United States every year, which is interesting. But something that's very important to note is that 50 to 70%, various reports have created this range, 50 to 70% of the energy used to mine Bitcoin is renewable sources. So Bitcoin mining is really just two inputs. It's the cost of your energy, cost of electricity, and the cost of the computers. So the cost of the computers is pretty the same for every Bitcoin mining business. So what you want to look at is try to find the lowest cost energy. This is like excess hydropower in rainy season in China, flared gases in remote Texas, where there's just an excess of natural gas, and it's actually more expensive to transport that natural gas than to just flare it off into the atmosphere. This is like other remote energy sources that are not economical to transport. So you could build solar panels out in the middle of the desert where you're getting tons of sun, but it's not close to human civilization that needs quite a bit of energy, and mine Bitcoin with it. So it's actually incentivizing the development of renewable energy, which I find fascinating and really turned my view around on this concern, because I was certainly concerned about it. Finally, governments will ban Bitcoin. And this is a concern that comes up, and it's a valid concern too, and a question I had. We have seen over the past 12 years that there's been a lot of positive regulatory development, especially over the past 3 years. I think if the government was going to ban Bitcoin or able to really cause it damage, it would have been, early in Bitcoin's history. I think the proverbial cat is out of the bag at this point, and we're seeing that kind of backed up by these regulatory decisions. Gary Gensler, who is the incoming chairman of the SEC, he actually taught courses about blockchain at MIT. We have quite a few senators and representatives who openly support Bitcoin. And the United States has a history of a hands-off approach to innovation and technology that are obviously sort of emerging as a new industry. And therefore we have the 5 largest companies in the world that are based on internet technology. So I think it's similar for Bitcoin. It's in America's interest to embrace it as an alternative store of value. Now, the dollar may continue to be used as a currency and a unit of accounts, and that can happen alongside Bitcoin being used as a store of value because of its deflationary and inflationary resistant monetary properties. So maybe someday in the future, Bitcoin will start being demanded more and more as a medium of exchange. As I said, when it becomes less volatile, maybe eventually it will replace the dollar in parts of the world and become the unit of account for those economies. I don't know what the future holds, but right now Bitcoin is proven to be a reliable, trustworthy store of value. Okay, so that's really it. I'll take some questions. I think we have a few minutes left for questions.
Thank you, Brady. I'm going to lead our question and answer portion. Just a reminder to Rotarians, if you do have a question, raise your electronic blue hand or shoot me a message in the chat and I will get you in the queue, which we already have started. It was started maybe 30 seconds after you started, Brady. So we have some great interesting questions. I'll start with Rotarian Wes Harper. Wes?
Thank you. And thank you, Brady, for putting Bitcoin in context. If I could, I have a short question and then a longer question. The short question is it true that there'll be one more division of the Bitcoin? And then my second question is, could you tell me how Grayscale operates?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think what you're referring to in terms of the division of Bitcoin is called the halving events. And Bitcoin's supply rate decreases or cuts in half every 4 years. So every 10 minutes, a Bitcoin block is mined. This just is a group of transactions on the blockchain that's added to the blockchain, the ledger that I spoke about earlier. So every 10 minutes, 50 Bitcoin were added to the supply for the first 4 years. So every one of those blocks had all the transactions in it. And one of the transactions was, here's 50 new Bitcoin into the system. And that it would go to the miners, the miner who mined that block. Then it was 25 after 4 years, then 12 and a half. Now we're at 6.25 Bitcoin being put into the system per block. So 900 a day, essentially. This puts Bitcoin at an inflation rate of about 1.8%. This is on par with gold. The next halving event will cut the inflation rate of Bitcoin down below 1%, and we'll have the hardest money, as we call it in economics, the hardest money in human history, which is very interesting. And that will continue to happen until 2140. But because it's an exponential curve, 88% of Bitcoin has already been, of all the Bitcoin that will ever exist, has already been mined and added into the supply. So the 2140 sounds, it's very far away and it sounds like there will be a lot more Bitcoin, but it's an exponentially decreasing curve. So it's just very small amounts over the last 60, 70 years. So that's the halving event. Yes, so that will happen every 4 years until 2140. So there'll be quite a few more of those. Grayscale is a trust company, and it's effectively the only way to get access to Bitcoin. It's a de facto ETF, exchange traded fund, essentially. So you buy shares in Grayscale, they buy Bitcoin. And that's basically it. That's how it works. So you can buy shares in Grayscale on the New York Stock Exchange. You can buy them in your 401k. You can ask your financial advisors about that. And so, yeah, this is basically the most accessible way to buy Bitcoin. Know that you're not actually like holding the Bitcoin itself, though. Grayscale is holding that Bitcoin. They own the actual asset. It's like them, like having the gold in their safe. But you have exposure to the Bitcoin price.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Brady. Our next question comes from Rotarian Bill Diaz. Bill?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brady. I have a question about the criminality of Bitcoin. Money laundering is a real problem. And how does Bitcoin guard against, if you have a lot of cash and you just use it to buy Bitcoin and it's dirty money, is there any way to guard against that?
Yes, there is. And as you know, there's KYC and AML laws, know your customer, and anti-money laundering laws in this country and many other countries. Bitcoin is actually a transparent ledger. Like it's every transaction that has ever existed in Bitcoin is included in this ledger. Law enforcement have just developed, and actually private companies that work with law enforcement have developed a process called chain analysis, and criminals using Bitcoin have been caught many, many times. It's easier actually for law enforcement to find a criminal who's used Bitcoin than it is cash. So the US dollar and cash is used far more often for criminal activity than Bitcoin is. Criminals have kind of discovered this over time and learned this. There was an underground market, a black market called the Silk Road in the early days of Bitcoin, when people using Bitcoin thought that it was a private, completely private money. The FBI found the people who were running the Silk Road, and from then on, it basically became known that it's not really a usable money for criminal activity. So chain analysis firms have determined that something like 0.5% of Bitcoin is used in attempted criminal activities. And like I said, the US dollar is used far more often than it is.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Brady. Our next question comes from Rotarian Kevin Marl. Kevin?
Hi, Brady. Thank you for your presentation. I particularly liked how you put it all in context with the history and focused a bit less on the technology to make it very digestible for all of us. My question, which I think you've already answered some of, was about if this were like a gas field, what the reserves were and the depletion rate. I think you said 80% has already been mined, and that's factored into the every 4 years, the halving to target a 1% inflation rate. So maybe if you could share a little bit more of, the certainty of that, but then also just long-term repercussions of having a fixed, a hard currency at 1% inflation in theory versus historically all these fiat currencies that would sort of, just drive high inflation towards the end of their usefulness.
Absolutely. Great question. Yes. So Bitcoin's inflation rate will actually decrease in half every 4 years. So next cycle in 2024, it will be down to 0.9%, but then it'll be 0.45%, et cetera, until it reaches an infinitely hard asset. So it's stock to value ratio, which is the amount, or stock to flow, ratio, which is the amount, the stock, the total supply versus the new flow, reaches infinity in 2140. So, and let me note real quick, there will be only 21 million Bitcoin, but it's divisible down to 8 decimal places. So there are, the smallest unit of Bitcoin is called a Satoshi, after the creator, the anonymous creator or pseudonymous creator of Bitcoin, or we call it a sat, or sats for short. And you can buy thousands or tens of thousands of sats for 10, 15, $20 now. So you can certainly buy a fraction of a Bitcoin, and the supply is actually 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis. So it's a lot more than it sounds like when you say 21 million Bitcoin. So it has that strict supply limit. And why is that important? Well, it preserves your wealth, the value of your wealth over generations. So I'm holding Bitcoin, a lot of my Bitcoin, for my kids, my grandkids, et cetera, because I know after each generation that Bitcoin is not going to inflate. It's not, and the purchasing power is not going to decrease over time. the dollar has lost 99% of its purchasing power in the last 100 years. So, you know, if you pass down dollars, just pure cash, to your descendants, it would be worth far less in purchasing power than it was then. And we can all kind of feel that, you know, like McDonald's hamburgers used to cost 10 cents or whatever, a Coke was a nickel, you know. So we all kind of see that happen over time. That's why people buy hard assets like real estate and stocks and things like that that are actually limited, because that's a better store of wealth over time than fiat money. So yeah, it's a generational store of wealth, and that's why, you know, these big corporations and investors are buying it too, so their wealth is not you know, decreased over time. Purchasing power is not decreased over time.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Rotarian Cole Mills. Cole?
Hey, Brady, thanks for the presentation. I got a kind of a two-part question. One is, what do you think the primary driver for the volatility in the Bitcoin is, right? Like, obviously, I work in finance, I work in the markets. Like, I can look at a company's balance sheet, look at PE ratios and forward earnings and all these things to determine what the value of a stock should be. But Bitcoin moves all over the map without any real true peg on what is driving. And to me, it seems like manias to the positive, manias to the negative. So I just would really like to understand, like, what is moving the price of a Bitcoin? And then secondarily to that, you made the point about, you know, as Bitcoin becomes more of a known quantity and more pervasive in the broader general economy, that it will start to potentially replace the US dollar as the kind of global currency for trade, and especially on oil. I would be interested to know what your perspective is on how that's a positive for the US. Because we're dollar denominated on oil and dollar denominated on a lot of ADRs and things like that out there in the global economy, it seems like it'd be against our U.S. interest to have the dollar fall away as a global trading currency. So I'm just curious to those 2 points.
Yeah. Okay. So volatility, and is it in America's interest to adopt Bitcoin? Great questions. They're relatively longer answers, but I'm gonna try to compress it as best I can. So volatility, yes. Bitcoin goes through these cycles, and we've seen very clearly that these cycles kind of play out every 4 years, which is not coincidentally the same cycle as the Bitcoin halving. So the scarcity of the Bitcoin is decreasing. Demand stays, even if demand stays the exact same over the months following a halving, the decreased supply eventually will drive the price up. So that happens, and then of course, once it breaks an all-time high, previous all-time high in 2017 was about $20,000. We're at $32,000 now. So we're sort of seeing the next start of this bull run. We had a halving event in May of 2020. So these cycles continue to happen. And of course, then there's speculators pile on, and there's a big bubble, and it bursts, and then it goes down. But like I said, there's this curve of adoption that's happening, and so you can see the volatility, but it is still going up over time, which is why we're at $32,000 now, and 10 years ago it was $5 or something. So yes, that is the answer. There are little bubbles, but in the long term, Bitcoin is not a bubble. So that's why at Swan we encourage people just to think about this as a long-term investment. Think about it like a 401k. You know, you're just putting a little away every month or week or whatever. And our main product is the easiest way to set up an automatic recurring buy. You can set how much you want to, you know, buy every week or even day, and we'll pull that money from your bank account. We'll buy you Bitcoin, and then it sits in a trust account under your name, a legal bank account under your name for your Bitcoin. Is it in America's interest to adopt Bitcoin? Okay, well, it is certainly in American citizens' interest, individuals' interests. Like I said, the purchasing power of our money has decreased greatly over time with the US dollar. Is it in the government's interest? Probably not, because the US dollar is one of probably the reason, the most important reason why America has so much influence over the world. And whoever has controlled the global reserve currency over time has had great influence over the world, including like Great Britain for a few hundred years, and then their currency kind of faded away and eventually transitioned to the dollar. We've seen global reserve currencies since we've kind of been a global economy for the past 500 or 600 years, relatively global economy, come and go in those cycles. Now, the thing is, the reason those cycles happen is because the better money replaces the worst money. And like I said, we converge earlier in the presentation, we converge on a money because we all kind of decide it's the best money, and it starts getting used more and more, and it has this network effect, and eventually it replaces the money that is, lost its value. So I don't know if it's really going to be the choice of the United States government. There will be this idea of jurisdictional arbitrage. So government people or countries that are friendly to Bitcoin will attract Bitcoin businesses and Bitcoiners and their wealth and their ingenuity and their work, etc. And America could start being left behind if Bitcoin was adopted in other parts of the world. So there's that kind of force as well. Money adoption is really an organic thing. It's a grassroots thing. So that's how it starts, and then it gets captured historically by a small group of people because there's so much power in the printing press and controlling the money supply. With Bitcoin, it's a decentralized system that cannot be co-opted by a central party. That's really the kind of revolution here, is that we have a money that cannot be co-opted by a central party. So that's my answer to whether or not it's gonna be good for America or not.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brady. All great questions, and I wish we
Yep.
had time for more. Next week, this meeting will once again be live via Zoom at noon on Tuesday, excuse me. Today, I want to thank our virtual guests, Andrew, Blake, Tyson, Charlotte, Michael. We're so glad you joined us. David, thank you for your reflection and the great quotes. Mike, thank you for reminding us of board nominations. And Jim, thank you for your insight into our Wheels of Power committee. Reed, we appreciated your speaker introduction. And Brady, thank you again for your fascinating presentation. The high quality of the questions shows our level of interest in this topic. Now, thanks to all of you who have already contributed to the Trust Drive, and thanks in advance to those of you who I know will contribute before the end of the month, which is in 5.5 days. As we enter into a new Rotary week, please join me in opening the doors of opportunity for healing, recovery, and peace building. As Rotarians, we are here to make our world healthier, more sustainable, and with justice for all. Have a good week, everyone, and this meeting is adjourned. Bye-bye.